If you can go ahead and hit OK, that'd be fantastic. All right. Well, welcome everyone to 10 things we wish students knew about their resume. My name is Brittany Crawford. I'll be your main point of contact for Job Search Jumpstart, but I also work in the career education office within student engagement and career development. It's the fancy long term for the career development office, and we're the ones who provide career education to all students throughout their time at U of A. And I worked at U of A for 8 years total, 5 in academic advising within athletics, 3 within my current role now in career education. And I love it. My favorite part is doing practice interviews. And one fun thing, let's see, if I go down a YouTube rabbit hole, I watch videos about pit bull rescues. So a little bit of fun fact about me. How about you, Amanda?
Hello, so my name is Amanda. I've been with our department. I'm a colleague of Brittany's and been with our department going on 4 years. I think Brittany and I were looking earlier and realized that jointly we have had over 1,000 student appointments where we've helped students with their documents, with, as Brittany mentioned, interviewing, with resumes. My YouTube rabbit hole would definitely be watching animals of different species become friends. I love that. I watched one yesterday where a parrot was riding on a puppy's back. That was amazing.
Let's see it. Okay, well, I'm sure they didn't come to hear about our YouTube rabbit holes, even though we go on forever. Let's jump right into the resume stuff. So 10 things that we wish students knew about their resume. And the whole point of this presentation is not to just get like yes, no rules about resume. It's really to provide an overview of how to communicate yourself through your resume. It's such a pivotal process in the job search process of getting your resume done, because you learn how to talk about yourself, how to figure out what you want to stand out, how do you cater your message to your audience, so who you're actually applying towards. When people really go through the process of writing a resume with care and strategy, they're better job hunters already just from doing this process. So these are the things that we want to break down to make sure that you're better job searchers. Okay, let's get into it. Anna, want to kick us off with our first one?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So number one, a resume is really a summary of skills, experiences, achievements, and it's a marketing tool. And we bring that up, that a resume is a marketing tool, no matter what industry you're in. If you're thinking of healthcare, if you're thinking of applying to potentially a grad school or another program, if you're thinking of economics, if you're thinking of going into marketing, no matter your industry, your resume is a marketing tool. It is really your chance to shine in this document and to really highlight your skills, experiences, and your achievements. This is a word we use a lot to talk about what we want to stand out as we're marketing ourselves on a resume. Some things we see when we think of like, you know, how this came up is one thing we see is resumes almost that function as a document that's like a background check, like it has everything in it, everything that anybody's done. And this is really a chance to kind of curate your experiences and really show what is unique to you and what you really want to stand out so you can shine on this document.
Awesome.
Yes. Any other
time.
things, Brittany, that come to mind for you?
No, I think the point that it's unique to you is something that we'll revisit as we keep going through some of these points. It's probably the most important point. So I totally agree, obviously. Let's jump into the next one. Don't sacrifice content for aesthetic when you're using a template. So this is something that I mentioned because for a lot of people who haven't written a resume before, or you're just wanting to get started or update one, it's natural to think, oh, let me use an example or a template to sort of get started because I've never written one of these before. Or, hey, you're coming to college now and you're like, I need mine to look a little bit more professional. I want to update it. And so you use a template. The problem is a lot of templates are written for mid-career level professionals. So because they're trying to capture as many people as possible. So you're going to get a resume that doesn't necessarily allow an undergraduate student or someone with limited experience to really describe their experiences and make a case for why they should be interviewed, right? So let me share an example. of one that like, here's just one that we've seen. And so maybe Amanda even talk about like with this example,
Yeah,
how this
so
resume, how this resume template can be interpreted by people who look at resumes all the time.
absolutely. So I look at that. I look at this, and it does have some visual appeal. And you can you can have something that is visually appealing and also has content and categories and headings that are unique to you. So for example, in this, if you were to take this, or if somebody was to take a template and use this example, it might feel like, oh, I have to fill out an about me, I have to fill out an objective. These are actually two things we would say you don't need both for sure. So that's already, we have some issues with a template where we wouldn't really suggest those things. Another thing I noticed, the experience doesn't really stand out in the way that it's written. There's not a lot of room to add or to write. So if you have a part-time job or a new experience that you're wanting to add onto your resume, it'd be really hard to add that in here. And you're building a lot of your experience right now. And then looking at the skills section, this wouldn't be something we suggest. Skills are really something you want to be very proficient in or feel like you could definitely identify, yes, this is a skill I have. You don't need to kind of rate skills. It might seem like visually eye-catching, but it actually is not helpful when an employer looks at that, because what an employer might see is you're identifying that you're not as good in some things as you are in others, and it's not something that we would suggest calling out. So this is an example of like where somebody could use this example or template and it really might not match the experiences they have, but you might feel compelled to have to fill all those sections in.
Totally. And another thing with the aesthetic is that this looks great, but a lot of the mistakes that we see with students is that even with the formatting, they feel handcuffed to keep this format. It's like a third of that page was just contact information. Well, what if you have something else to say? I've seen students say, well, I don't have room to add this part-time job. I'm like, so because this format is laid out this way, you're going to leave out some experience that might be the difference between you getting an interview or not. Don't do that. So don't feel handcuffed to a template, and also know your industry. So if I was in computer science, or I won't even use something with computers, if like, let's say accounting, a more traditional direct line where it's like, I'm an accounting major, I'm an accountant, something like that, this visual appeal might not be something that's industry standard for them. They're wanting to see more about your experience with industry tools and what you've actually done, to where this aesthetic is not maybe something that matters to the accounting department. So know your audience. Okay, let's share the third one.
Let's see.
Go for it, Amanda.
Okay, yes. So creating section headings or categories for your resume based on your experience, not the other way around. So as you're writing about your experience, maybe you're developing a resume from scratch, maybe you're editing one, you can always kind of restart and refresh no matter where you're at with your current resume. If you have something that you're not thrilled about, you can actually just start entirely over and find a new way to write about your experiences. But one thing that we would say is really write about your experiences. Maybe you're writing about all of your work experience or leadership experience, or you've done a few different volunteer experiences or community service projects, and writing about those, and then start to categorize and see what categories or section headings just appear to you. Certain things might stand out, like, oh, I have 3 experiences that would be considered volunteer experience or community service. So then that community service might become a section for you. Somebody else might have had 3 or 4 part-time or full-time jobs. Then for sure, experience would be a section for you. Whereas somebody else might have, let's say you were involved in high school, and you're, a first-year student, maybe you were involved in high school and have a lot of things to share. So your education or involvement might have more under that. So get ideas from other resumes of different section headings, but really create, work with your experience first, and then kind of allow the section headings to appear based on what you might categorize together.
Absolutely. And here's a great example of not only categorizing your experience accurately, but also strategically. So here's an example of a student I met with once who wanted to go into marketing. And so let's take a look at these two side by side. On the left-hand example, she just had the word experience and listed all her experience in chronological order. So with most recent on top. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is totally fine. This is standard practice. But she's in marketing, right? So let's put on our marketing thinking caps. And how can we market this section of your resume? So she's like, well, 3 of the experiences actually when I was doing marketing and retail, and that's what I want to go into. Okay, so let's call that out. So we've got one section now that's marketing and retail experience. And we've got another section that's leadership and volunteer experience, which accurately captures her other experiences. So now when I look on the left side, I just get a quick glance and I get experience, and I have to read through all those lines to understand what her experience entails. But on the right side, if I just looked at the headings, like strictly look at the headliners, almost like I'm looking at the Coachella lineup, I see marketing and retail experience, leadership and volunteer experience, and without even getting into the details of each bullet point, I get a quick snapshot of her experience just from using headings strategically. So that's how important and strategic you can use headings for. So it's something that when you take that next step of using headings strategically and accurately, that it can help boost your resume as a marketing tool. Awesome. Okay, let's go to the next one. We've got making styling choices with a purpose. So you'll notice that with a lot of our advice, it's about being purposeful. So for example, using bold or italics or underlining, why do we use those things? Bold to me means this is really important. Italics means like this is standing out. You're wanting to add style or be consistent with something. Use that reasoning and rationale with your resume. If you want something to stand out, bold it and think, why am I bolding this? Or what do I want to highlight by underlining this? So you don't have to make it just arbitrary or because that's how your template was. So for example, Amanda helped 2 students with their resume. So can you give an example of, just walk us through the choices that this is student Kiara made with how she decided to style her resume?
Yes. So thank you, Brittany. And yes, this is a great example. So with Kara, she was really wanting, you can see, I mean, even if you just naturally just looked at this resume and just think what stands out to you, it's probably your eye goes to the bolded statements. So she's calling out some professional experience. She had an internship role with the OSIRIS-REx mission. She also was an intern with Biosphere 2. She's at the time that she was crafting this resume, her goal was to eventually work at NASA. I believe she is now working at NASA. She's a grad from 2019. So congrats to Kira, that's amazing. This resume definitely helped her get there. But you notice that she's calling out, she's marketing what she is bringing to what she has to offer, which she's calling out that OSIRIS-REx mission, Biosphere 2, these things are going to be known, very well known and prestigious within her industry. So that's an example of calling out the employer because it's going to be known in her industry. And then I think there's another example we have too, Brittany, of Andrea's. Yes. So on a different note, Andrea had really wanted to call out her titles. So she was going to be working, she wanted to work as a photographer. She is working as a full-time photographer, also a grad from 2019. And she was interested in also working within in photography and also within marketing. So she wanted to call out the titles she'd held as a marketing director with Tucson School of Photography, with as a photographer, as a volunteer photographer, and then calling out her leadership experience as a volunteer and then with Blue Chip. So she's really drawing attention to her titles. And these are things that helped her really call out specific experience and titles she'd held to convey what she was going to be able to do in another environment.
Yeah, and I love that these are real students who came in trying to tell us how do I communicate this? And then that's our goal, is to help you communicate it well. So it's not just scratching out commas and coming in with a red pen, say this, don't say this. You'll start to see that there's some strategy to this. And so that's what we want to communicate. So oh, go ahead. Yes.
Their resumes did not start like that. That was like the finished. Their resume, I think we probably went through about 3 or 4 drafts. So definitely this was not the starting point, but that was kind of the finishing point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and moving on to just how you even talk about what the heck you've done in the past. And so this is probably the toughest like point to get when we're editing resumes, but once you've got it, it's like now we're cooking. So go for it, Amanda.
Sure. So fortunately, there is a formula that we suggest. And this is, we think that one of the hardest parts is writing. We get that question a lot. Well, what are you supposed to say about yourself? What do employers want to hear? How do you talk about this? Does it sound kind of bragging, if I'm saying this? And this is a chance where it is okay to do that. So using the action plus project or problem plus result formula really helps you do that. And this is, if you think of all of our work, if you think of what we're doing right now, what you might do in a volunteer experience, in a club, in a part-time job, you're taking a lot of different actions, you're working on different projects or problems, and there's a result, there's an impact of whatever it is you're doing. So we'll look at an example of this. This was also a student that we worked with that had originally club treasurer on her resume and no description. So, it kind of brought up a conversation like, well, what is this role that you did? What did you do there? So if we look at this balance, are the actions that she took. So balance, create, maintain, approve, oversee. Those are all the different actions. And immediately those words stand out like, oh, wow, that's a lot of responsibility. Then if we think about what's the project, so she balanced a $7,000 budget. She created reports. That's a project. She maintained the financial records. The financial records are the project. And then the weekly supply orders that she oversees are the projects. So all of those are examples of projects. And then the results, and she's balancing these, the budget and creating reports, it's 2-track spending. That's the overall impact that she helped with. And then with maintaining financial records, the result is to ensure the budget goals are met. So a lot of times when you get to that word to, if you can start to write some actions about your experience, start to write the projects and lead yourself to the word to, you're getting to the result. Anything that you would add, Brittany, in helping? This is a big step, writing within APR, and it takes time.
It does. I think the APR structure helps so much because on a lot of writing, especially when you're writing your first professional resume, it's like everyone kind of gets thought of like, I just want it to sound good, or I want it to sound cool. It's like, don't worry about it sounding fancy to start with. Worry about it being accurate, and we can always help you with your professional tone. But when you try to do too much or try to sound too fancy, you'll get into a problem which we'll address right now, which is avoid passive voice, minimizing your experience, and jargon. So what do we mean by that? What is passive voice? This is a common issue with students because a lot of times, like Amanda mentioned, you're like, oh, I don't want to sound braggy. You're like, do I really do that? Yes, you do. You're just being accurate. It's not, you're not taking more credit than you deserve. You're just describing your experience. And when you don't do that accurately, an employer reads it and they're not going to help you make a case for yourself. They're not going to say, now I wonder if she's done more, but she's just not feeling comfortable saying that. She's going to say, no, she's not as qualified. And maybe you go in the no pile. Like that's what we're trying to avoid here. So when you use passive voice, and I'll walk through an example, what you're doing is you're kind of separating yourself from the actions that you took, even in just the language that you use. So let's look at an example. Passive voice. This is how you know you're using passive voice. Check for the phrase helped with.
Oh, Brittany.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I don't think we can see the slide.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Wanted to my other screen. Yeah. I'll go back one. I shared the wrong screen. Here we go. How about now?
We've got some great examples. There it is. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Passive voice. So if ever you see the phrase helped with, you know you're using some passive voice. In most environments, you're working with others, so we know that you helped. But instead, you can capture that to active voice. I usually just say, skip over helped with and go to your next verb. And that's probably what the sentence should start with. So instead of helped with, it's just process drink orders accurately to provide to baristas to minimize customer wait times. So we know you helped with it, but just start with the strong verb. No need to say helped with. worked with, helped with. Like, these are things that take away your accomplishments. So, and you don't want to do that on your resume. Same thing with minimizing your experience. A lot of times I see students describe what they learned, but if you have this in an experience, I want to know how you learned that. So for example, someone might put, I learned time management skills by ordering supplies and hiring vendors for a client banquet event. That's great. I know you learned it, but you probably did something to learn it. So for this person, they prioritized ordering supplies and hiring vendors to prepare for a client banquet event. And then you see this part at the end, to meet fiscal year deadline. Like, oh, why was that time management? And this will come out of discussion with students. It's like, well, I had to meet the deadline. I'm like, well, in the first bullet point, I didn't know there was a deadline. So now we do. How about jargon, Amanda? Want to tackle this question about jargon?
Yes, so this is another thing that we see on resumes oftentimes. Sometimes in a skills section, this is where I often see jargon, and just to kind of, the definitions up there of what we mean by jargon. So kind of just to think of like, do you have some of these things on your resume, maybe under a skills section, or if you have a statement at the top, are you using any jargon like team player, hard worker, self-motivated? These all are really great things, and any employer is going to expect those things of anybody they hire. They're going to expect somebody to work hard. They're going to really hope that they're motivated, and in most environments, we're collaborating or partnering, we're working with teams, and we, are being hired to work well with others. So these are all kind of jargon words that might have had some value on a resume in the past, but they're not very marketing minded or strategic right now. So you might find other words like show this in your actions, show when you've collaborated, show, that example that Brittany shared of the prioritized, that would show somebody working hard, they're making decisions. Self-motivated, that can come across as your results driven, or you're meeting goals, or you're exceeding goals. So find other actions that take the place of those words that might be more kind of jargon like and aren't actually skills, they're characteristics.
Nice. And I stopped because we got a question in the chat from Julia.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. She said, if we did it in the past, so whatever the action is, do we need to keep it in the past tense, like the helped with sentence? Great question, Julia. In general, the rule is for present jobs or present roles, use present tense. So no ing at the end. Like if I serve, then it's serve, not serving. Or if I host, host, create, whatever. Insert your verb, just present tense. If I did it in the past, then I change the verb to past tense. So processed, created, designed, executed. So if we take that same thing, like with the helped with, I would hope now you know that we're not looking for helped with. You would just change process to processed. Does that make sense? Thumbs up. Any other questions about that? Great question, because that's a very common one that we see. And that's just something that's small, you're welcome, that shows attention to detail. There's nothing that, kind of puts, kind of like, a thought in my head when I see that someone has described themselves as having attention to detail, and then they have a small mistake like that in their resume, because it's like, oh no, I see the contradiction in your application still. So great question. And we'll jump right back into just one small thing with a very jargony bullet point. So this is just an example of a sentence that's filled with jargon. So someone might say, demonstrated executive leadership by expertly navigating dynamic client relations to deliver impactful results and exceed company expectations. If I saw that on a resume, you might read that. Some of you might read that and be like, ooh, that sounds good. If I'm an employer really looking to hire someone on my team, I'm thinking, what did they do? I did not learn anything from that other than they know a lot of business jargon and they've kind of learned the trendy things to say. I don't know what they did, how they did it. There's no data in there to know that they delivered impactful results. I know nothing. And we see this a lot when you get students that are borrowing resumes from, parents or other people who have worked a long time, because they're like, this sounds so good. And I'm like, I agree that it might sound complicated, but it doesn't necessarily prove to an employer that you are a good fit. So something to keep in mind. Okay, 3 more points. I think the last ones go pretty quickly. Number 7, go for it, Amanda.
Oh, yes, objective statements and summary statements. So yes, I'm guessing that a number of us know about objective statements. They've been a trend for a very long time. They often tell an employer what, or whomever you are applying to, whatever you are applying to, what you are wanting. So, seeking opportunities to do this particular thing. They're generally not very specific. And this was a trend for sure in over the last probably 20 years. It's less of a trend in the last 5 years, and we see more of a trend around summary statements, which often tell an employer what you will bring to that environment. So you can kind of pack those with a few more skills, and there might be different instances of using one versus another. Objective statements you might use if you're looking for an internship and really do want to say what you'd like to gain skills in. I always encourage we encourage, like, be specific about what you're wanting to gain skills in, and make it a little less general and a little more specific to you.
Yeah.
And then,
oh, go for it. Sorry.
Oh, yes, but you have an example, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if you want to.
Yes. I'm like, I know there's an example for this one. So yes, please walk us through this example, Brittany, because I know this was a student that you worked with.
Yes, and you can also jump in about what you learned because you didn't know this student, so you can give that same perspective. This was a student I worked with who was a mechanical engineering major, which is a very broad area of engineering, but this could apply to anyone. So his initial statement said, mechanical engineering graduate seeking to gain hands-on experience in real-world design projects. First sentence, I look at that and I'm like, who isn't as a mechanical engineer graduate? Like, this doesn't separate you from anyone. All mechanical engineers, I'm assuming, engineers in general want to work in real world design projects. So you've got one sentence down and I've just learned about, I haven't really learned anything about you that makes you unique. So we got the second sentence, looking for a full-time position to start my dream career as an engineer at a large aerospace firm. So I read that one and I'm like, isn't it lots of people's dream to start their career at a large aerospace firm? Like, all I learned was that you are like the other stack of applicants that I have. And maybe you have some other great things going on, but you use the top portion of your resume to tell me nothing special. And so that's not a dig, but it's like, oh, let's use this space strategically. So Amanda, like even if you were reviewing this resume, what could you tell from the second version of this that wasn't there in the first?
Yes. Oh, okay. First, I noticed design focus. So they're calling themselves out with a particular skill set and that could be different. So that could be collaborative mechanical engineer, that could be results oriented, solution oriented, but they're choosing design. So they're really letting whomever is reading their resume know, like, I am design focused. I'm a design focused mechanical engineer. They're calling out that they have interpersonal communication skills. I immediately see they've won an award, Raytheon. There's a number of words that are jumping out that I noticed that really starts to narrow down and be very unique to this individual. They thrive in collaborative team environments. Okay, and then they do say they're seeking to contribute to advances in defense technology. They're calling out an industry. They're not just looking for real world design projects. They want to work in a particular segment doing design. So I think it's more exciting. I think it's more impactful, and it definitely would convey to an employer some things that this individual is going to bring that other candidates might not have, or might not have shown if they went with just a very simple statement.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll go through these next ones fairly quickly because these are easy. Well, this one's kind of complex. So match the language in your resume with the language from the job description. Now I'm going to have some nuance here. You're going to learn a lot in your college career that you should not take other people's words. No plagiarism. Do not be copy and pasting your essays here. But when it comes to the job search, you do want to utilize the language from the job description. Now, I don't mean copy and paste all the bullet points from the description into what you do, but when you match language, you show fit. So Amanda, I know you have a great example even about your current job.
Oh, yes. So I work in career education now. And when I applied for this position, originally a few years ago, the title was career educator. And I had worked as a career advisor in another institution. And so, I went through my resume, and a lot of my resume had, advised students on this practice, advised faculty members on, materials before and curriculum advice. So that, I found that the word advise was in my resume a lot. So in matching the job description, I noticed that this particular job of career educator called out educate students about this, educate, staff and team about this. So I really just swapped out the word advise and put in educate. They were really, I knew they're the same thing. I knew exactly what this was about. But I really tailored it to this job so that I could show I read the job description. I'm aware that I'm a fit. I'm matching my skills and what my experience has been with what this job is asking for. So I always give that experience because I think it was helpful in really matching that.
Yeah, I think you got the gig.
I got the gig.
Okay, last two. Go for it, Amanda. You can read this one.
Okay, sure. So you're going to get a lot of different resume advice. And it's great, like ask questions and take in that advice. And, you'll hear from your family members, from siblings, from roommates, from your parents. But really consider where your resume advice is coming from. As we see students sometimes that will say, well, so-and-so told me to do this, or my dad read it and he said this, and I thought you were supposed to do this. And, consider that what worked for somebody, will that work for you, or it might not work for you. Also consider, what that you're really getting on trend advice, and kind of asking questions, and whether you're doing some research or, researching through Google, researching by asking one of the career education team members as you're in the Job Search Jumpstart program. Ask the questions that you have come up for you, and based on the different advice that you get. And just know that like one resume is not going to fit everything that you're looking for. So you can take bits and pieces of different ideas that you've gotten from resumes and create your own. Again, your marketing, your own unique skill set, what is unique about your experience and your achievements. And, so that one template that somebody has, or one example, might not be a match for yours, or their advice might not match what you're looking for. Is there anything, Brittany, that you think you'd add into that?
No, I kind of like give that my quick spiel of like when you get resume advice from people, everyone's kind of right because it worked for them, but everyone's kind of wrong because they're not you. So use your judgment from what you've learned so far to know like, okay, I like this element of their resume, but what were they trying to communicate? Is that what I'm trying to communicate? Like if they're showing off their technical skills and I can barely create a PDF, is that something I want to do? Maybe not. So take it with a grain of salt. And so the last thing that we'll talk about, the last point, short and sweet, get your resume reviewed by a professional. And by professional, we don't mean like someone that you hire, we mean us. So our services are free to you throughout your entire U of A career and a year after graduation. Like you can make a one-on-one appointment with us tomorrow. So take advantage of that. The first person who sees your resume should not be an employer. Like that's the only piece of advice I have. Make sure that you're having someone take a look at it. I know it's really personal, or it can feel self-conscious. Like, I don't know if I want to share this, but it is worth it. We're going to give you the feedback that you need with the context that you're bringing. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the current recording.